SoundCartel.
In this episode, we talk to David Brown about being the host of some of the world's biggest podcasts, Wondery's Business Wars, Business Wars Daily, and WeCrashed.
So it goes through a lot of ears and a lot of eyes. It's a really labor-intense process. It reminds me a lot of what the BBC, what Australian Broadcasting, several other major state radio services used to do in the golden age of radio, I suppose you could say, in that there was such attention paid to detail. Nothing could really get wrong because, in a way, your authority is on the line. You know, it's like being part of a journalistic enterprise in that regard.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nick Schuldberger, and this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 4 of season 4. And welcome to my co-host, Nicole Goodman.
Hi, Nick. Oh, my goodness. We were like kids in a candy store when David Brown accepted our invitation to be on the show.
We sure were. We both love Business Wars, and we also devoured WeCrashed, which is also being made into a TV series for Apple TV+.
That's right.
But before we get to David, and I know you're excited, we actually have some exciting news of our own to announce. Now, you will have noticed that the artwork for this podcast has changed, and this is because we have undertaken our biggest rebranding in our 36-year history. We are no longer B Media Production. We are now SoundCartel.
We are, and it's incredibly exciting. We've been producing audio for brands for so many years, but almost in the background, and we're in a new era of audio now, and it really was time to step out. And the name SoundCartel really does reflect a more edgy, exciting journey ahead for the business.
Yes, it does, but the word cartel has raised a few eyebrows, hasn't it?
It has. But really for us, the term cartel reflects more of the closeness of the team. We're really collaborative with our clients, who we also bring in, and they really become part of our cartel.
Yeah, they certainly do. Now, we are also very proud to have launched our new website, which explains more of our story and also showcases lots of our current work. So if you'd like to check it out, and we hope you do, head over to soundcartel.com.au. Now, also, as part of this rebrand, we've launched our Sonic brand, which you would have heard at the very start of this episode. Now, perhaps, Nicole, in the next episode, we can explain the story behind the Sonic brand and also the importance of audio branding for businesses.
Yeah, definitely, Nick. Look, we've talked a lot on the podcast about the importance of having an audio strategy. So understanding what your brand actually sounds like to your customers. So, for example, your on-hold messages, any voiced ads you have or jingles, do they reflect your brand accurately? The story around the Sonic brand for SoundCartel is an interesting one. It almost literally includes our DNA, but we'll discuss that next week because it really is quite an interesting story.
Yes, I look forward to telling it on the next episode. But before we get to our interview, we've also been busy doing something else during this isolation period. We certainly haven't been sitting on our hands.
No, we haven't.
And we've actually launched just this week on the 18th of May, our own daily business podcast called Business Essentials Daily. And Nicole, you're the host.
I am. And we definitely haven't been bored in this lockdown period. But look, it's been a really great opportunity to step into a role that builds on the heritage and the reputation of the audio magazine, the Business Essentials audio magazine, that's been delivering to businesses for 3 decades. And now we're taking that knowledge to a new generation of business owners and podcast listeners. It's going to be available every weekday from 6 a.m. at our website or wherever you get your favourite podcasts.
Yes, and that website is bdaily.com.au. Now, speaking of business podcasts, let's get to our chat today, our very exciting chat with David Brown.
Yes, let's, because for Business Wars nerds like us, Nick, it kind of was surreal. It's almost like we were in an episode of Business Wars. We had a really good time talking to David, so it went on for a little bit, but we've split the interview into 2 episodes of Podcasting Essentials. So the second one you'll hear in a fortnight. But in part 1, David takes us behind the scenes of how Wondery produces some of the most successful podcasts in the world. David is a radio news host and he's based in Texas. He also hosts Wondery series Business Wars and Business Wars Daily. He spent 3 decades in public radio journalism and he's won multiple awards for his work, including a Peabody. And Business Wars also won the Best Business Podcast at the 2019 International Webbies. His voice is as smooth as silk. He's engaging and he tells a great story. But best of all, he's actually the nicest guy you are likely to meet.
And Nicole, you even managed to make him blush.
Yes, I may have. Also, look, for context, we spoke to David just before COVID-19 took hold. And for those who don't know, I started by asking David, what is Business Wars?
Business Wars is a lot of fun. It's when I first heard that this might be a possibility, someone said the thing about business is that quite often we think of Wall Street or the financial centers of London or Tokyo, Shanghai, but it's sort of soulless, it's sort of dry. The fun in business is always that human element. And so the founder of Wondery, which is this podcasting company based in Los Angeles, he'd come up with this idea. What if you could kind of go deep into the heart of some of these great battles like Coke versus Pepsi or Nike versus Adidas or Nintendo versus Sony or Netflix versus HBO or even before that, you probably didn't have Blockbusters. Did you have Blockbuster?
Yeah, we did.
Absolutely, yeah.
You did? Okay, well, so there you go. So everyone kind of connects to these major brands, right? And in fact, a lot of us feel think about how you have Apple people or Windows people. I mean, we invest a lot of our identity into these brands. Well, that, I think, is what Business Wars is all about. We're sort of looking at these battles between these titans, a lot of these brands that have become household names, and we're looking at it from the inside out. So sometimes you get a sense of how the CEO or the entrepreneur started up a business because they wanted to get rich or they just wanted to get someone's attention. Sometimes it's because they want to beat the other guy, you know. They think that they can do computers better. You know, you think about the Steve Jobs story, for example. It's those kinds of stories. And when we started to go deeper and started to do some of the early research on the program, we realized, wow, it's kind of surprising that this hasn't been mined more. You think about the recent movie, what is it, the movie about Ford and Ferrari? In a way, that's a kind of business war unto itself, and it's so cinematic. And there are these larger-than-life characters behind the scenes. And those are the kind of characters we try to bring out in Business Wars. Usually it's 6 episodes over the course of about 3 weeks or so, with 2 episodes coming out every week. And each of them is about 30 minutes long. And at the end of these 6 episodes, quite often we'll spend another 30 minutes doing an in-depth interview with someone, perhaps someone who wrote the book on this particular business war, or maybe someone who knows a lot about the industry, that kind of thing. And that's what Business Wars is all about.
How did you come to host one of the most popular business podcasts? Was it an idea that Hernan Lopez, the founder of Wondery, came to you with, or was it something you suggested?
It was actually, Hernan and I, we didn't know each other. He used to work for, you've probably heard of the Fox networks.
Yes.
I think there's a famous Australian that's behind some of that.
A little famous, yeah.
Yeah, a little famous. Well, he used to work for the international arm of that, and he saw what was happening with podcasts several years ago, and so he had come up with this idea. Well, I used to be the host of a program on public radio here in the States. It's called Marketplace. It's still on the air, and it's a national public radio style program, and it's heard across the country. And I was based in L.A., and while there, I made a lot of great friends and rubbed shoulders with a lot of really terrific producers, and one of those producers ended up at Wondery in L.A., and I had since moved from Los Angeles to Austin, Texas, which is where I'm at now. And one day I get this call, and it's from one of the former producers at Marketplace. And she says, hey, I'm working over at Wondery. What's Wondery? Well, it's this great podcast platform. And my boss, I told him about you because he has this idea for Business Wars, and would you be interested in talking with him about it? He got on the line, and he said, I'll send you over a script, and maybe we can just want to hear you talk. And so we started talking, and he said, well, if you'd like it, we'd love for you to do it. And it all happened very quickly. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I figured maybe will be a 3 or 4 shows. And so now here it is about 2 years and a couple of months into it later. And we now have, I don't even know how many episodes out there now, but a lot. A whole lot.
Yeah, well, and an award. You won, probably many awards, but you won the Webby Award in 2019 for the Best Business Podcast. Congratulations.
That was wild. Thank you. Thank you so much. My cat, I put my Webby Award up on my shelf, and my cat knocked it over. And so it got bent, and it looks like a little spring, but it got bent. So now I'm trying to get it replaced. So, but yeah, it's one of my, I appreciate you saying something about it. It was a real honor to get that.
There might be more awards coming because you're also hosting another popular podcast at the moment about the stunning demise of WeWork and its founder, Adam Newman, called WeCrashed. How did that podcast come about?
That was interesting because Wondery has done a couple of things. They have these series. They have something called American History Tellers. They have several of these ongoing series that are sort of thematic. Every now and then they'll step back and do reported stories in series form. They've done one about a corrupt doctor who was accused in the deaths of many, many of his patients. And that was reported from the ground up by someone that Wondery brought in for that specific project.
Right.
Well, in a similar way, once WeWork started to crash, most people have heard that story of how WeWork, they thought they were on the brink of making history, valued at $47 billion, getting set for this huge IPO, and they had this charismatic CEO. It has all the elements of a great movie, right? Well, they thought, before the movie's made, let's go ahead and get in there and start getting some of these firsthand memories, some of these firsthand accounts of people who were involved behind the scenes. So we had some reporters go out to New York and other places to basically do the kind of journalistic interviews that one would do if one were doing a documentary. And so we started using some of the storytelling techniques that we use in other Wondery programs and put it together with the first-person tape, audio that we had gathered, the reporters had gathered. And it comes together as a series of 6 programs. And we'll cap it off with another long-form interview with a highly esteemed business professor from NYU. And it's a fascinating story. I've caught myself as I was hosting it, just doing the script, just having to stop and laugh out loud because some of this stuff is just, you can't believe that it actually happened. It's just too far-fetched. It's just too unbelievable.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I want to move on to Wondery, obviously the organisation behind these fabulous podcasts. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work for Wondery? And also, on the recording side of things, if they're based in LA and you're based in Austin, Texas, does that mean you're recording remotely?
Well, Wondery is based in LA. We have producers and reporters and writers all over the world, really. We have people in London. We have folks in New York and in Boston. We have people who do voice work in Dallas, and here I am in Austin. But the main headquarters is in Beverly Hills. And there's a pretty big staff. I couldn't begin to tell you how many people are at Wondery, but I feel like I'm always discovering new people. But basically, our main headquarters is there in Beverly Hills, and the people who lead up each little team of podcasts, most of them are in California. Mm-hmm. But then we have people who do the script reading, like myself. They're all over the country. Then you have people who are writers. Quite often they're book authors, people who've literally written the book about a subject, and they can be wherever they are. And everyone is just sort of doing things remotely. And we'll prearrange a time for a script read, and a producer will get on the line, and I'll basically do the script that I get off of Google Docs, and they'll hear me talking, and they'll be giving me direction as I'm doing the read. Or if I come across something that just doesn't seem right in a read, or maybe something that seems problematic or whatever, then I might go in and make a suggestion, and we'll edit there on the fly. Then that audio is sent to San Francisco, where someone else does all of the massaging of the sound design. And then it goes back to Los Angeles, where the advertisements are mixed in, and it hits, like, say, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts or whatever. It's all distributed out of Los Angeles. Yeah. So it's a tangled web.
So, David, you actually have a strong journalistic and news background. And I know that you have a team helping to produce the shows, as you've just mentioned, but do you do any of the research and any of the writing for the podcast, or are you purely hosting?
I do almost none of the research. I do a little bit of the writing, but I think in all fairness, other people do the writing and I do just the hosting. Where I feel like I'm able to sort of stretch my legs a little bit on the journalistic side is when we do our interview podcasts at the end of series, and then they give me enough rope to hang myself with. But I'll be honest with you, since you've heard, we worked, by the way, I should mention the WeCrashed series is different from Business Wars in one important respect. In Business Wars, I get to be an actor. I'm doing voices and that sort of thing. In WeCrashed, I'm not really doing any of that. Almost all of it, with rare exception, almost all of it is actual firsthand tape. So that's more of a journalistic enterprise, whereas Business Wars is much more of a sort of a storytelling, history-based enterprise. So there's a little bit of a difference. But I do love writing for the ear. And I love reading scripts because in a way it's like telling stories. As a Southerner, we love telling stories. So it's a joy on a lot of different levels, and it really scratches an itch for me. WeCrashed in particular scratches that journalistic itch for me, but I think it would probably be stretching things to say that I do the research. I don't.
Right. Would you have an insight then as to how the stories are developed and how much time goes into the research and producing the podcast you host? Because they're so rich with detail.
Tons of time. There are a couple of series where I've been sort of, I suppose you could say, kind of a weak advisor in a sense. I happen to love guitars and I happen to love motorcycles. So when we did our series on Harley Davidson versus the world, or when we did our series on Fender versus Gibson guitars, one of the first things I did was talk with one of the show writers, and we just had a conversation about a lot of the things that show writer might want to look for as he or she was doing the research. And then they go off and spend quite a bit of time talking to people who've written the books on these subjects. And then they'll actually do a whole lot of reading themselves, bringing together latest news as well, so we're not missing something big or important that's developing. And that writer pretty much does all of that research, his or herself. Then a producer in Los Angeles will go over that script. Usually it's script by script. And it's a long, involved process. And that script, after getting edited, often gets yet another edit. And then it comes to me, and then I'll do my read with the producer on the line. And then that tape will then get another listen by someone else in Los Angeles before we send it for sound design. So it goes through a lot of ears and a lot of eyes. Mm-hmm. It's a really labor-intense process. It reminds me a lot of what the BBC, what Australian Broadcasting, several other major state radio services used to do in the golden age of radio, I suppose you could say, in that there was such attention paid to detail. Nothing could really get wrong because, in a way, your authority is on the line. It's like being a part of a journalistic enterprise in that regard.
We've been producing audio for 3 decades, so well before podcasting existed. So that attention to detail is sort of part of our culture here as well.
Yeah.
Part of that process, you're releasing 2 episodes of Business Wars every week, in addition to Business Wars Daily and a bunch of other shows. How far ahead, from a production scheduling point of view, are episodes produced?
WeCrashed was a different animal, but optimally we're about 2 weeks ahead in our production schedule. Sometimes when something is breaking news or like there's some big business deal on the horizon or something, we might get pretty close to the day of distribution. So we might be a couple of days off, and in a couple of cases, well, I do another podcast called Business Wars Daily, which are much shorter form, and we just had to redo a podcast today because there was some breaking news. Actually, the podcast is for tomorrow, but the news broke today, so we had to redo that even though we were about 4 days in advance of the scheduled publication. So that gives you a sort of a sense.
That's cutting it fine.
Yeah, it really is. But that gives you a sense of where
for the Daily Show as well, you're trying to work about 2 weeks in advance as well, is that?
Daily Show is actually 1 week in advance typically, because actually a little less. It's about 4 days in advance because that's more time sensitive. Yes. And it also requires less sound production. They're much shorter episodes. They're around 3 to 5 minutes long. So those are little clips, and we don't have to dedicate so much time. It's really about making sure that its accuracy is what it's about for Business Wars Daily. And so The thing is, we're writing, though, about stories that are really happening in real time. So it's not unusual for there to be breaking news, and we have to go back in and try to fix something or pull in a couple of cases, we've had to pull what was already out there and replace it with an update. And so it's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, and releasing shows twice weekly and daily makes sense for ongoing podcasts. But WeCrashed being, a standalone series of 6 episodes, was there a conversation about releasing that all at once for those who like to binge listen to a podcast?
Yeah, there was. I'm trying to think if there's been anything that I've been involved with in radio that's been as labor intensive, but I can't recall anything. Maybe a documentary or two, an all-form documentary or two. But what we tried to do is do 2 episodes at a time and really take a lot of care. Everything had to be lawyered out. Everything had to, fine-tooth comb over everything. And on occasion, we'd find something that was, I'm not sure that we can actually say that because of this choice of word. Is it really? So it's taken a long time to put that together. I mean, it's important to get it right. So I think the decision was made some time back that we actually started working on WeCrashed. Gosh, it must have been in the fall of last year, if I'm not mistaken, as soon as we heard about it, about the news events. That was when work began. And then we actually started recording it. It must have been in late December. And that was the first episode. And once we get off the line here, I'm going to be doing another retrack for episode 4, which is just coming out. And it would be hard to get everything done and then put it out there and not expect to have to basically go back in there and start pulling things apart and deconstructing it. So I think we were trying to be realistic.
Yeah, it's more of a production scheduling issue rather than thinking about the marketing implications, I guess. Yeah,
for sure. Oh, for sure. Absolutely, yeah.
Now, we talk a lot about the role of the host, and it's incredibly important in podcasting. What do you think makes you such a good host?
I think it's my looks. No, I don't know. It's nice that Wondery would consider me for this opportunity. I will tell you that I think whenever someone is doing a hosting gig, and I'm going to try to extract myself from this, I'll just think about people that I've enjoyed listening to. And I think you have to feel like you're talking to an individual. And Lord knows that's the way that I feel when I'm doing a podcast. And there are different kinds of podcasts, right? I mean, there are podcasts where you do interviews and it's not that important. The audience member is sort of the fly on the wall listening. Don't mean to insult any audience members by making analogies to flies, but I just mean that in a sense, eavesdropping is one form of participating in the podcast. I think in a podcast similar to Wondery, and there are lots of podcasts where you're basically doing storytelling, it's a bit like whispering into someone's ear. And you have to anticipate, or you try to anticipate, what the listener is thinking at a given moment. And in a perfect world, what you're doing is you're guiding the listener to ask a question. And you're trying to answer that question when the question pops into her head. So you're talking about something, and hopefully, if you've written it right, that listener is thinking, and then what happened? And then what happened? And a good host will then give it to you just so, And silence works wonders, by the way, in audio, because it has that anticipatory sort of thing. Anyway, I think the best hosts are thinking about the audience and not about themselves.
That was David Brown, host of Wondery's Business Wars and Business Wars Daily. I could listen to that voice all day. In the next episode of Podcasting Essentials, we'll finish our chat with David, where we look at how Wondery monetizes its podcasts, and we'll also get David's advice for brands looking to produce their own award-winning podcast. So make sure you subscribe to Podcasting Essentials if you haven't already.
Wasn't it interesting, Nick, to hear how meticulous the detail is that goes into producing each and every episode of Business Wars? It's amazing, and actually really no accident that they won the awards and that WeCrashed is becoming a TV series.
Yeah, the planning and research, and then editing, re-editing, then editing some more. It really is labour intensive, but that's what's required if you want to be in the top tier of podcasts worldwide.
Yep.
It is time consuming, but the rewards are there, certainly there, if you take the time and the effort to do it really, really well.
That's true, Nick. But also, it's not to say that you can't produce a more cost-effective and successful podcast. Particularly now, a lot of businesses are turning to podcasts to communicate with their audiences, and it's the speed of that communication also that's really attractive for brands. So no, you don't have to set out with a big budget to have a high-impact podcast. But if you do have a big budget, we can produce something incredible for you as well.
We certainly can. That's it for this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Thanks so much, Nicole, for joining me as always.
My absolute pleasure, Nick.
We'd love for you to check out our new website at soundcartel.com.au and, of course, subscribe to Podcasting Essentials.
And Business Essentials Daily has just launched, so don't forget to subscribe to that as well.
And if you'd like to discuss producing a podcast for your business, we'd love to hear from you. From all of us at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.